Hello everybody, Arantula here, and here's the first part of what I hope is a very long-going series of me reviewing every episode of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Now, I don't consider myself a brony, I consider myself a very casual fan of the show. And this is honestly the biggest reason why I don't really know if I'm the right person to try doing this type of series. But I don't see other people trying this concept of video for this show in particular. I mean, there are plenty of reviewers like the Mysterious Mr. Enter, Josh Scorcher, Dr. Wolf, etc, etc. And you know, it just looked really fun to me, so I figured, hey, let's try it. As you're likely already aware, I had timestamps in the description down below. So if you feel like skipping this intro, or just to see a specific episode of this season in general, then by all means, go ahead and skip to it. But a little bit of background, I first got into this idea of trying to review every episode in a cartoon by watching Pie Guy Rules and its every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants Reviewed series. And of course, he also went on to try doing it in Adventure Time and Teen Titans as well. And you know, I just don't want people to think that I'm ripping anybody off. I just think it's a really cool idea, and of course, I want to give all the credit to him for this idea as well. And so if you see some similarities between this video and his series of reviewing every episode of Insert Cartoon Here Reviewed, that's why. Now, it's really hard for me to be able to really review episodes with a completely unbiased opinion, and that bias is often fueled by seeing other reviewers before me, like I watched Mr. Enter religiously back in the day. But for certain episodes where he feels really strongly about, I'm going to try and be a lot more personal to myself and trying to be honest at least with how I feel about it. Because you clicked this video to hear my opinion, not someone else's, so I want to try giving you that as best as I possibly can. Now for this project, I plan on rewatching every episode at least 3 times just to make sure I get as much out of it as possible. And to rate them all, I'm going to be going by 3 categories for how good the episode I think is. For example, there's good episodes where basically I think the episode is just really sound all things considered. It could be really funny, it could have a very good moral, it could be very heartfelt, it just make me really feel from it. There's no real checklist, it really just boils down to how I really feel after watching it. Lower but not too low, we have okay episodes, and they're just as you'd expect them to be. These are episodes that don't really leave much of a strong impression, but I don't think are really doing anything too bad to really warrant a bad ranking, or what I like to call a nightmare episode. Maybe it teaches a bad or broken moral, or maybe it just really did not keep my attention for very long. In general, episodes that fall into this category, I just really do not like. Of course, we are bound to have disagreements unless you're a direct clone of myself, so of course, if you have any disagreements, leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your reasoning behind what you think about the episodes that we're reviewing here. Let's do this thing. Episode 1, Friendship is Magic, Part 1. Twilight Sparkle, a studious yet reclusive unicorn, is assigned the task of making friends. Being the first episode, it has to do a lot to set up for the rest of the show, and all in all it does, pretty good. We meet our main cast, Twilight Sparkle, Pinkie Pie, Applejack, Rainbow Dash, Rarity, and Fluttershy, and we're given a decent bit of insight as to what their characters really are. Twilight is aloof and introverted but studious. So is Spike, yet much more social with the same amount of friends that Twilight has. Pinkie Pie is eccentric and extroverted. Applejack is a hard worker with a large family. Rainbow Dash is haughty but agile. Rarity is obsessed with fashion and glamour. And Fluttershy is seen as quiet and very timid, but has a very soft spot for animals. It is just the first episode, so their characters may be pretty one note, but there will be the rest of the season to make up for that. I have to say, it's kind of incredible just how seriously this show takes itself. Like, instead of the land of the ponies, this show actually takes place in a place called Equestria, which is actually a pretty clever name considering that equines is Latin for horse. However, this episode is not necessarily without its faults either. The dialogue can be pretty blunt all things considered, and one example of this is when Twilight is ranting and raving about how she just wants to be able to study but can't because she has all these people trying to be her friends. I just feel like it wouldn't really hurt to be a little more subtle about it. Also, this won't factor into my final score, but I find it really funny how Nightmare Moon actually thinks that any pony will remember her when she's been trapped in the moon for over a millennium. Like, girl, how long do you really think ponies live for? But yeah, for what it's worth, it's a good introduction, and if I had to be honest, it's a good episode. There are some really funny moments in this episode too. My favorite just has to be the part where Fluttershy and Twilight meet for the first time, and Fluttershy looks so freaking awkward. And it's like Twilight's trying to make small talk, but she can't because Fluttershy just for the life of her cannot raise her voice to a coherent level. And then she just headbutts her on her rump out of the way so she can talk to Spike, and it's just, I love the delivery of this scene. But of course, this is a 2-parter, and as such, before we can finalize this episode's score, we have to look at the second part first. Hopefully it stays under good, but it might not. Episode 2, Friendship is Magic, Part 2. Twilight and her friends venture into the Everfree Forest to defeat Nightmare Moon. So this episode tries to do a lot in the little amount of time it has, and honestly, it feels like it's trying to do too much. First, it has to establish how our main characters will defeat Nightmare Moon, then it has to go through all the trials the main characters have to go through to actually demonstrate that they can defeat Nightmare Moon, and then they actually defeat Nightmare Moon. The bulk of this episode takes place with those same trials, and if we're being real, they range from being kinda mediocre to downright dumb. For the latter, both Applejack and Rainbow Dash are prime examples of this flaw. Applejack is just telling Twilight to let go of her while she's hanging off a cliff and is about to fall to her death. But it's okay because, as Applejack says, she'll be safe. Not, you'll be caught, not, Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash are waiting down there to catch you, it's just, you'll be safe. And somehow this demonstrates that she's an honest pony? I don't get it. As for Rainbow Dash, she's basically being tempted by these Shadow Bolts, which are trying to persuade her to get rid of her friends and instead join them to become the fastest flyers in the Everfree Forest. But it's like, both in this episode and the previous part of this episode, it's been established that Rainbow Dash has been obsessing over the Wonder Bolts for like forever. Why would she abandon her hopes and dreams for some team she never even heard of before? B. Being the fastest flyers in the Everfree Forest can mean literally anything. We have no idea how fast these ponies are. They could be slow as molasses for all we know. C. There's no reason why she would not be able to just build a bridge and then go with them. Like, can you not have made this any less blatant? And D, and most importantly, Fluttershy's with them too. She can also fly. What would you do then? The rest of the trials are just pretty mediocre in my opinion. I don't really have a problem with Pinkie Pie's song. Honestly, I don't know how you do this kind of story without having her sing in it, because trying to display the element of laughter I think is a challenge in and of itself. I find Rarity's dumb too, but I get that she just cannot ignore a crime against fashion, so okay, so be it. I mean, in Applejack's trial, it has been demonstrated that both Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash can both combined support the weight of one of their friends, so they could just fight each other over. It'd be slow and tedious, and they have to do it one at a time, but hey, it's an option. Fluttershy is just the only one I don't really have a real problem with, if only because we already know that she has an affinity for animals, and it's just so heart-meltingly sweet, I really just cannot be mad at it. So it's the climax, albeit really corny and cheesy, but you know something? I think for a show like this, it just works. That being said, I hate to say it, but this is in fact our first Nightmare episode! I get that this episode had to do a lot, but if I'll be honest, I really just do not think that 22 minutes was enough time to really give these characters a chance to flesh out their elements. This likely would have worked if each main 6 member had one episode to themselves to really demonstrate their elements, but a couple of minutes in a 22-minute long episode each just does not feel like enough. Heck, as far as Applejack is concerned, I didn't even know she demonstrated honesty until Twilight recapped it. Now, don't quote me on this, but I remember hearing somewhere at some point in time that Applejack was called the element of trust, and I couldn't believe it after seeing this episode because honestly, I just don't see it. Overall, a good first part and a bad second part equals around an okay episode. Not good, not bad, somewhere in the middle. Episode 3, The Ticket Master. Twilight, who's given 2 tickets to the Grand Galloping Gala, must choose one friend to take with her there, and all 5 of them want to go. Let me start off by saying I love Spike in this episode. He echoes basically everything I'm thinking as is going on in the show. That being said, I find it strange how Twilight's 2 tickets does not automatically mean that Spike is a shoo-in, considering that, well, they've known each other for much longer than the rest of Twilight's friends, which is kind of off-putting, wouldn't you think? Anyway, yes, this episode has a very obvious solution in which all Twilight would have to do is ask Princess Celestia to get more tickets, and she'd have more tickets. However, that is not why I dislike this episode. No, I dislike this episode because the rest of Twilight's friends are kind of terrible. All episode long until the last 3 minutes, they're badgering her for the ticket, and it's just so obnoxious. And the reasons for wanting to go are flimsy at best and downright terrible at worst. Looking at you, Rainbow Dash. The one exception being Applejack, who wants to go to the gala for an honestly pretty selfless reason, helping further her own business and helping her own family out. Everyone else though, entirely selfish. Believe it or not, Twilight is not a part of this episode that I dislike. I can totally get behind that she's just too hungry to really think about it. And yes, for that reason as well, I can't excuse the fact that she did not think to ask Celestia for more tickets. Unfortunately, that is also dragged down by the fact that Rainbow Dash, Applejack, and Fluttershy all try to use food to persuade her. I won't sugarcoat it, that's just mean. Meanwhile, Rarity was trying to guilt trip Twilight for the ticket ever since she first found out about them. and Pinkie Pie just gets the whole town on Twilight trying to get the tickets from her. On the note of rarity, it's been established in the very previous episode, Friendship is Magic Part 2, that she's the element of generosity. 3 episodes in, and you've already failed to demonstrate your element. And yeah, she's not perfect. Nobody is. And to her credit, she is also the first pony to suggest treating Twilight to some free food after the conflict is resolved, but still. I'd expect this maybe a few episodes later down the line, not the very next episode after the elements of harmony has been established. No, I would not say this is her being out of character. This is the first season. These characters can be anything they want at this point in the game. But like, you wouldn't expect Fluttershy to go around greeting every pony as if they were her next door neighbors, wouldn't you? Maybe if this episode came out at a later date where we got the note of May 6 better, it would be a little more passable. But as is, I'm sorry, but this is a nightmare episode through and through. To this episode's credit, there may have been a lot of things I did not like about this episode, but it wasn't beyond saving. If the characters were just a little more developed, I could definitely see this at least being an okay episode. Or maybe just have Twilight's friends not be so blunt about wanting to go to the gala. Like, what if they felt bad around the scene where Twilight tells them all to go away and let her think about it, and then after that they actually show some guilt and they try to genuinely help her without having any selfish motives behind it. But then Twilight, who's delirious from hunger, confuses her friends' gestures as them trying to butter her up. Very little else would need to change, and Twilight's friends would still be kept likable the entire episode. This may come off as a hot take, but at least Angel Bunny was honest about wanting the ticket and not really wanting to help Twilight. And it's sad that I can praise Angel Bunny more than I can praise Fluttershy. That is an accomplishment. Episode 4, Applebug Season. A sleep-deprived Applejack harvests an orchard of apples all by herself while trying to help her friends with their tasks. So this is the first episode of My Little Pony that's not focused entirely around Twilight Sparkle. Actually, it's focused more on Applejack, and it's really cool to see more of the main 6 get the spotlight. Anyway, the plot here is that Applejack is trying to harvest all these apples, but she's actively refusing help for doing it, and her exhaustion causes trouble for everybody else. It's actually not a bad concept at all, and it really gives Applejack, a pony that's known to be stubborn, a chance to really come to accept that sometimes having some help is not a bad thing. In execution though, well, I'm sorry to say, but this episode I just found really boring. Don't get me wrong, there were some funny moments, like for example where Twilight was trying to give her speech but couldn't because she kept getting interrupted, or her reaction to basically having nothing happen in Ponyville after a stampede of bunnies, which I just thought was really funny, for example. But all in all, not really. The humor is pretty light, all things considered. You may find some of Applejack's moments to be funny, like when she's sleep deprived, but I just didn't. It just felt like it was really slow paced and honestly made me want to go to sleep at some points. Story and humor aside, this episode is really just watching ponies suffer for the most part. I found Rainbow Dash's seemed to be pretty funny, and Fluttershy's was okay if only for Twilight's reaction to the stampede, but not Pinkie Pie, and this time it's not even her fault that I did not like the scene. So there's being sleep deprived where you can't really think straight because you're just too tired, and then there's just being stupid. Now, I don't care how sleep deprived you are, I cannot think of anybody that would actively go out of their way to dig up earthworms thinking that that would be called for in a recipe. And I get it, it's supposed to be funny because it's just so absurd, but I can't find it funny because not only does she think this actually goes in muffins, but Pinkie Pie doesn't even check. And before Applejack does get these ingredients for the muffins, Pinkie Pie even says she's gonna help by putting in her own ingredients too. How does she not look inside the bowl and see there's something wrong with what Applejack put in there? Actually, better question. Applejack announced as outlaw what she's putting in the bowl. How does Pinkie Pie not even hear what Applejack is putting in the bowl if she's saying it out loud after being read the ingredients? And yeah, the scene that's soon to follow, I have to be honest, just made me feel really uncomfortable because I did not like seeing these ponies get really sick. Though I'll admit, seeing Spike actually love these muffins, it was actually pretty funny. Even though I find it just a little bit concerning that Twilight let Spike eat out of the trash, I mean, that's at least a funny moment to end the episode on. Originally, this was going to be another Nightmare episode, but after rewatching it, I decided that, you know what, this episode may be close to Nightmare quality, but it will get by with an okay rating. And before anyone asks, no, I don't have a problem with Applejack not asking for help this episode before the end, when she did ask for help in the beginning of the last episode. This was very clearly a way of Applejack trying to demonstrate that she was capable of doing something all by herself. So if I'm being honest, this episode had a bit of missed potential with its moral. Of course, not being ashamed to ask your friends for help is important, but it also implies another moral I think is really good to teach kids. Namely that you should try to take care of yourself before taking care of others. Because after all, if you're not well, how can you help other people get well? Episode 5, Griffin the Brush Off. Pinkie Pie has to contend with an old friend of Rainbow Dash. There is a lot about this episode that I really love about it. I love that it gives Pinkie Pie more of a personality beyond just being ridiculously eccentric, and I absolutely adored seeing her and Rainbow Dash bond over to pranks. Overall, the very first 7 minutes of this episode are a very pleasant watch. It's also cool to see that their friends are really good about getting pranked, like they actually are really good sports about it. And it's good to see that Pinkie Pie is really careful about who to prank too, like she doesn't want to prank Fluttershy because she's too sensitive. That's a really admirable attitude. This episode is also just really funny. Not just the scenes in the beginning of the episode, but also some of the scenes of the party at the end of it. I also like how this conflict is not necessarily unambiguous as far as who's actually right. Yes, Gilda was abrasive, but you could also argue that Pinkie Pie was just being really intrusive. Yeah, I find it a little weird that Twilight would sooner believe that Pinkie Pie is jealous and not that Gilda is really up to bad news, but in all fairness, she was kind of right. Her delivery could have been improved, but the bottom line is, it really is not a bad moral to teach either. Sometimes your friends will have friends that just aren't your friends, and I wish that Pinkie Pie did learn this moral, but she doesn't. No, she really didn't learn anything. In fact, this episode paints her as if she was in the right all along. Which, unfortunately, I think is just a missed opportunity. And the missed opportunity caused because, well, Gilda sucks. Yeah, let's talk about Gilda. She speaks almost primarily 90s slang, and her character can be boiled down to just being a bully. There really is nothing to Gilda at all that make her really interesting or noteworthy or really anything as far as season 1 is concerned. While the beginning was good, the middle is where everything really falls apart. We as the audience already know that Pinkie Pie has a point that Gilda is very abrasive, but I guess that just was not a good enough reason to make her an antagonist. So let's have her go steal some apples and terrorize the elderly and bully Fluttershy. Because that'll make people like Gilda immediately recognizable. I get that the writer was trying to make Pinkie Pie question whether or not she was actually right to be suspicious of Gilda. And while I do get the vibe that she is being amicable, this also just makes her look really stupid. Really, how would you return an apple if they already ate it? Yeah, this episode is especially unfortunate. I wanted to call it good, but I just can't because this middle part absolutely kills what they were going for. It's just okay. That being said, I wonder how this episode would have went if Twilight had less of a role. Like, I'm just imagining the drama that would sprout up because maybe Pinkie Pie was trying to confess to Rainbow Dash directly that she thought that Gilda was bad news, and then Rainbow Dash got really defensive over her old friend. She'd have a stronger argument too, unlike Twilight, who's never even heard of Gilda before now. And I myself could totally see myself in that position where I get really defensive over someone I thought was really cool, but in fact we're not really cool at all. I don't know, tell me what you think in the comments down below. Episode 6. Boastbusters. When a boastful unicorn arrives in Ponyville, Spike wants to see Twilight put her in her place. This episode honestly impressed me. This is the one episode in Season 1 which is basically unanimously agreed on to be absolutely terrible. So let's not waste any time. It's a nightmare episode! With that out of the way, let's talk about it. Trixie gains a very fast reputation for being a loudmouth. How fast? Too fast. Like, maybe if she was in Ponyville for longer than just a single day, it would be a lot more organic. Instead, her show barely even starts, and Rainbow Dash, Applejack, and Rarity are at her throat. I guess these ponies never got the memo, but you don't have to stay at her show. Just go away, let her have her show, let everyone else enjoy watching her show. You don't have to stay there. But no, instead they heckle her. And bear in mind, Trixie's occupation is no different from a street performer. It's her job to over-embellish her talents. That's how she gains an audience, and that's how she makes money. Actually, no, we don't even see her making money from this show. It looks like she's just trying to entertain people. And seeing these three get humiliated, you know, the characters we're supposed to love while Trixie's the one we're supposed to hate, fails to make us hate Trixie and instead just makes us happy that she's able to stand up for herself so well. Seriously, Trixie is an absolute pro at playing the crowd, and it really goes to show how well she can do it just by seeing how she retaliates here. And this is the first blunder of the episode. We don't hate Trixie, and so we don't want to see her lose. At least, I and most others don't hate Trixie. If you do hate Trixie, you have to also account for how the main six are acting absolutely reprehensible here by trying to show her up. And again, it's her job to over-embellish her talents. You know, with how Trixie was presented, I find it kind of weird how she ended up being a unicorn at the end of the day. Like, isn't magic just a common thing in Equestria? Like, all unicorns possess it? Like, when you really think about it, being a unicorn that can perform magic tricks feels like a pretty redundant thing to show off to other ponies, wouldn't it be? Like, what if Trixie's main draw was less so that she was a unicorn that was extremely powerful, and more so she was like a pony that wasn't a unicorn that could perform magic tricks? And she has both a robe and a hat to block what could be her wings or her horn. What if a part of her costume was having fake wings so people thought she was a Pegasus? That'd be a lot more interesting. The moral here also just does not feel nearly as practical as another lesson that could have been taught. Like, instead of being afraid to share what your talents are, why not let it be a lesson about dealing with ponies like Trixie? It would certainly be a lot more applicable than the lesson that I guess Trixie may have to learn in the future, which she never really had to learn. The second blunder, however, has to do with how the main six are characterized. Now, Trixie has the excuse of this being her job. What are Applejack's, Rarity's, and Rainbow Dash's excuses? They find her annoying. Okay, well, that'd be a lot more understandable if this happened over the course of a few days or maybe a week. And maybe if Snips and Snails just were much more prevalent in this episode and would not stop talking about how cool she was. You may find this weird to hear, but Snips and Snails, while they're annoying parts of this episode, I found their roles here to be pretty effective. If they were able to be as big loudmouths as Spike was, and more throughout the day like Spike was at literally every opportunity he could find, they would have served the really real purpose of making Trixie actively annoying to listen to. And hey, we'd still like Trixie because, well, it's not her talking, but it would at least give Rainbow Dash, Rarity, and Applejack more of a motivation to do what they did. But instead of that, we get Spike constantly badgering Twilight to do something about this when she very well can, but refuses to. And quite frankly, I agree with Twilight here. What Twilight's afraid of is that she'll lose her friends because they'll think of her as a loudmouth because she shows up Trixie. Which out of context sounds weird, especially since it would be standing up for her friends, but you have to remember, they attack Trixie with almost no provocation whatsoever. So it actually is very likely that they would attack Twilight, or at least that's the implication. And yes, Spike. At first, it was endearing to hear him brag about Twilight so often, but after a while it gets grating because he just keeps on going and going and going about it, even when she's adamantly trying to avoid having attention drawn to herself. Not to mention, he's still to put the thought into Snips and Snails' mind to get an Ursa Major to Ponyville, rampaging the town, and almost causing a ton of property damage, and most notably, have Trixie's mobile home destroyed. Yeah, the pony that just showed up to Ponyville to basically give a good show to some ponies ends up losing her house! And the punishment that Snips, Snails, and Spike gets for all of this mischief they've caused? Mustaches. No, I'm not kidding you. They get mustaches. Ghostbusters is a putrid, horribly written episode that has so many issues wrong with it that I cannot sum them all up in this video. It's not just bad, it's an atrocity. Episode 7, Dragonshy. A napping dragon threatens Equestria with a century of smoke, and the main six must get him to leave. Dragonshy is often regarded as a classic. And for good reason, it's a good episode. Now, I still like Griffin the Brush Off, but Dragonshy is where the show really started getting good, and looking at it again, I can definitely see why. It's just an all-around really solid episode. And seeing Fluttershy's courageous diatribe towards that dragon at the end of the episode was absolutely amazing. She may be scared of dragons, but she's way more scared of seeing her friends get hurt, and that is just awesome. Especially after seeing what both Twilight and Pinkie Pie got hit by after trying to reason with the dragon too. There is something I find just a little bit weird though concerning Fluttershy and her relationship with animals, and that's just thinking about how a dragon isn't that much further off from a pony than maybe a rabbit or a bird would be. Like, I don't doubt that dragons are considered animals because of how she opened up when she saw Spike in the episode Friendship is Magic Part 1, but the dragon itself is also intelligent, as it's also been able to speak to her just fine. And not just Fluttershy, but also Rarity and Twilight Sparkle. For lack of a better word, it just feels a little disconnected when you consider the fact that, like, a dragon can speak to ponies just fine, but not a Manticore, or her pet Angel Bunny. Fluttershy's coolness aside, this is also just really funny. One of my absolute favorite scenes was seeing Pinkie Pie try to encourage Fluttershy to jump over a chasm. And she gives us a little jig about doing a hop, skip, and a jump to jump over that chasm too. Only for it to then be revealed that the chasm was like 3 or 4 feet wide. And Fluttershy just has her hind and front hooves on opposite sides of the chasm. That was just hilarious. But that pales in comparison to the avalanche. This was so good. You can feel the tension amidst the silence where the main six are trying to cross an avalanche zone, and then just one itty bitty little leaf falls on Fluttershy's back and she just screams, "Avalanche!" And it gives way to an admittedly really tense scene where the main six are trying to dodge boulders that are falling off the mountain, and there are some moments where they almost get crushed too. This is one of the few times in the show there's legitimate danger following our main characters. Twilight even almost dies here, and only barely gets saved in the last second by Applejack. I really just cannot find anything about this episode I didn't like about it. I love this episode. And for Fluttershy's first big appearance, this was fantastic. And it really makes me want to watch more of the show. Episode 8, Look Before You Sleep. While trapped in Twilight's home, Rarity and Applejack join her for a slumber party. So this is an interesting setup. You have a very neat and tidy pony like Rarity, who doesn't like getting dirty and is much more a fan of, let's say, having good presentation, and a hard-working, more practical pony in Applejack who just wants to get stuff done. Between these two characters, there's actually a lot of potential for a good dynamic here, but this episode already drops the ball incredibly early on. And that has to do with the setup. Namely how Rarity is out and about in the field, working on taking down branches when, no, she's not doing that. She's trying to put branches back on trees and make them look neat, when a storm is brewing soon and those branches are going to fall down anyway. And it's established in this episode that she hates getting dirty. So, I don't like to use this term very often, but I think it's actually applicable here. Rarity seems very out of character in this episode, just because this is not a scenario where she would exist in. That'd be like Rainbow Dash going to the spa. Barring that, both Rarity and Applejack act like infantile children in this episode. They're almost always bickering, and it actually gets on my nerves because it's just annoying to hear them do it so often. And this is all already so far taking place before the theme song comes on, so not a good start whatsoever. After the theme song, however, well, they're stuck at Twilight's house while there's a storm going on and she wants a slumber party, which, you know, I'm not necessarily entirely against Twilight wanting a slumber party. Being an introvert doesn't necessarily mean you're completely against social events, especially if they're with close friends and family, but that's not my problem with Twilight in this episode. No, my problem with Twilight in this episode is that she's here at all. The most of what she does is completely focused on what a book is telling her that she has to do for her slumber party to be fun. And both Rarity and Applejack are taking advantage of the slumber party to take potshots at each other. It gets old very fast, and the few moments that I thought would be entertaining at least, don't really last very long, because Twilight keeps going back to this book and it just disrupts all the pacing. The ghost story part with the headless horse is a prime example. I was here waiting for Twilight to laugh after seeing both Rarity and Applejack react to her story, but nope, back to the book, and it's like, ghost stories? Check. It's a joke that falls flat, that's all I can really say about it. At some point, I was even wondering whether or not Twilight was aware that Applejack and Rarity were at odds with each other. And lo and behold, she was aware, and she only decides to address it when they were trying to go to sleep. Now, I've been pretty negative so far, but there were at least some things about this episode I thought were pretty good, and they all have to do with the ending of it. There weren't a lot of moments, but I did at least enjoy seeing some character development coming from Applejack, where she was asking for help from Rarity, and she really does show up to be the bigger mayor here, emphasizing where her need to be neat, and getting her help after all. And it would have given this episode some points, but no, Twilight also had to ruin this moment herself too. Namely by addressing a book about slumber parties for help as far as what to do if a tree crashes in your house. Can we talk about this moment, by the way? Why is it that this episode is bringing so much attention to Rarity and how she has such a hyper focus on trying to be neat and tidy, when both she and Applejack are trying to conform the Twilight sparkle and her obsession with a book and trying to follow that to a T as closely as possible, even during situations where obviously a book could not possibly be able to account for every little inconvenience that could happen? See, there's being obsessive over what you're looking at in a book, and then there's being completely brain dead. I like Twilight, but not when she's boiled down to only caring about what's in a book and not using her brain for anything else at all. I didn't want to do this. I really didn't, but I cannot excuse this episode for being so bad. And it's a shame because Dragonshy, which was such a fantastic episode for Season 1, is sandwiched between both Ghostbusters and this one. It's a nightmare episode. The characterization sucked. The setup, dead on arrival. Even the plot of half of the main six getting together for a slumber party was just, this seems like something that would be textbook little girl cartoon example plots. And the final product is utter trash, and it can be thrown out with the rest of the debris out of Twilight's window. Episode 9, Bridal Gossip. Everyone has superstitious beliefs against the mysterious zebra Zecora, and they try to avoid her by any means necessary. So, this episode struggles from the opposite issue that Griffin the Brushoff had. That episode had a pretty strong start, and this episode had a really bad one. Inversely though, Griffin the Brushoff got kinda weak in the middle of the episode, but then picked up near the end of it. Meanwhile, Bridal Gossip, near the 7-minute mark, actually started getting really good, and near the end of it all, well, we'll get to that point. So yeah, everyone is superstitious. Fluttershy, Applejack, Rarity, Pinkie Pie, even Rainbow Dash. But not Twilight. Actually, Twilight's really rational here. Instead of just assuming about Zecora, she's thinking maybe she's not so bad after all if you just talk to her. The only problem is that she doesn't talk to her. Apple Bloom chases after her instead, and that starts a lot of issues. This episode also struggles a lot from telling but not showing anything about Zecora. I can excuse it because, again, it's about superstitions and the main six don't really know her at all, but a little more visual flair would be much appreciated. To this episode's credit though, we get a lot more visual flair by the midway point. The very next day, and the curse, wink wink nudge nudge, has afflicted the main six, and Apple Bloom is the only pony to not be affected. Spoiler alert, it's actually the result of Poison Joke, which is basically a plant that likes to play practical jokes on ponies. And this is easily the best part of the episode. A lot of the physical humor like Pinkie Pie's tongue and Rainbow Dash constantly crashing into the wall are really funny. Also, whoever did Fluttershy's voice from this point onward, I am so jealous of their pipes. Still, Twilight is skeptical about the idea that curses really exist, which, you know, if you're a magic-wielding unicorn, you really don't have the ground to make that claim. And well, seeing her try to explain why magic really does exist, and then seeing Fluttershy and Pinkie Pie look at each other all funny, like, what is she talking about? I like this moment. It's funny to know that even her friends sometimes think she needs more fiber in her diet. Now, as for the part where Apple Bloom tracks down Sakura and tries to fix this mess that she got everyone else into, and then seeing Applejack be left for dead in the Everfree Forest, I'll be honest, I don't have a problem with this scene. Earlier in this episode, it's been kind of played off as if the Everfree Forest doesn't work any differently than it does in the real world. And the only thing to really come out of the Everfree Forest in this episode are some plants that play practical jokes on ponies. And Applejack isn't shown to be in any real danger either, so it's ultimately pretty harmless. Now as for the ending, I actually really like this ending. Listen, it's been established that Sakura isn't from here. She hails from a far-off land, so it's only natural that she wants to keep some mementos from there. And given the context of what she and Apple Bloom were up to, I'm sorry, but I can't accept her wording. Remember, this conflict arose because of misunderstandings. So just one more push, which also ends up convincing Twilight that she may have been wrong all along. To me at least, it all feels very well timed. And to be honest, I am a sucker for the moral about not judging a book by its cover. But what really sells it to me, and probably the thing that's going to push this episode from being okay to good, and yes, just so you know, this is a good episode, it's just Twilight's apology. It feels very sincere and genuine, and that she really learned something serious from this adventure. All in all, I really enjoyed this. I have to say though, Fluttershy's line of asking whether or not maybe Sakura is digging for innocent creatures near the beginning of the episode, it's dumb. Like, as if you didn't do the dirty work of hunting for your birds so they don't have to hunt for worms themselves. Hypocrisy is not a good look on you, Fluttershy. Episode 10, Swarm of the Century. An infestation of parasprites causes havoc in Ponyville as Princess Celestia is visiting. So, the story behind this episode is that Fluttershy, unbeknownst to her, brings basically locusts into Ponyville, and only Pinkie Pie really knows what these parasprites even are or how to deal with them. As for Fluttershy, Rarity, Twilight, and even Rainbow Dash, however, they don't know the dangers of the parasprites, and they don't really realize it until after they've already gotten really big and out of control. And as they all and Applejack strive to try and stop the parasprites, well, Pinkie Pie is hot on the case trying to get instruments so that she can do it herself. And that's really all the plot, so let's start with the bad about this episode. And trust me when I say this, there really isn't a lot of bad. So admittedly, Twilight and her friends are pretty dismissive of Pinkie Pie's concerns, and basically ignore her for most of the episode. Rainbow Dash and Applejack even outwardly insult her for being utterly detached from what they're trying to do. Which I would have a problem with, but here's the thing. One, I can appreciate that at least Pinkie Pie is getting told this to her face. And it's not exactly unwarranted either that she is being told this. So this is a criticism I hear a lot about Swarm of the Century, and that's just that the main six aren't asking questions to Pinkie Pie. But that's not exactly true, and this could be seen as a nitpick, but two, in actuality, there was one question that was asked to Pinkie Pie before the infestation got really bad. And that was from Fluttershy. Before getting cut off, she did ask Pinkie Pie why she didn't like the parasprites, and Pinkie Pie ignored her. It's extremely easy to miss, but Fluttershy did in fact ask Pinkie Pie a question. And with Pinkie Pie offering no explanation, well, they had all the reason not to really pay attention to her. Or well, at least Fluttershy had no reason to pay attention to her. Everyone else is debatable, but at least the fact that she was asked one question does say enough to me to say that she did have the chance to explain it and just didn't. That being said, Fluttershy is not completely free from blame. Later on in the episode, Applejack and the rest of the main six did manage to corral the parasprites outside of Ponyville, but Fluttershy hoarded just one in her cottage and the infestation got out of control again. And this is after knowing that they were destructive, so yeah, she really has no excuse this time around. And this one blunder gave way to a big mistake. Twilight trying to cast a spell to make the parasprites not eat the food anymore, and well, they eat everything that's not food, which, let's just say, gave way to lots and lots of pandemonium. Which reminds me, I love some good chaos, and this episode was nothing short of chaotic. Even though Fluttershy screwed up bad, it gave way to some of the funniest moments of this episode I've ever seen, and even some of the funniest moments of Season 1. My favorite part would likely be the part where the Parent Sprites are eating Rarity's clothes in her boutique. Then Pinkie Pie charges in, steals her recorder, and then runs out, leaving Rarity screaming with panic. That was so funny. I kept laughing into the part where then Applejack loses her barn because of the support beams being the only things left alive by the Parent Sprites, but everything else was devoured like they were termites. And those were just a few of the moments I really liked in this otherwise just really good episode. The story itself was really kind of middling, and that was mostly thanks to Fluttershy, but with the humor this episode had, it was definitely what I think is worth watching again. Episode 11, Winter Wrap-Up. Winter needs to be cleaned up to make way for spring, and Twilight wants to help out. The catch? She has to do it without using magic. Now, I have to start off by saying that the song Winter Wrap-Up is absolutely phenomenal. Not only is the melody beautiful, but it does a really good job at introducing the plot of the episode and everyone's roles in a really fun manner. And it's a good thing too because everything after the song is middling at best. It's fun to see the hijinks from Twilight trying to help every pony out, but some are more fun to watch than others. And well, it's split really far down the middle. I enjoyed seeing her try to help Rarity and Pinkie Pie, but with Fluttershy and Applejack, not so much. Especially not with Fluttershy's part. It feels like the world is just a little too mean to her here. Like, it was almost funny, but the Beehive part just did not sit well with me. And I feel like it's just because Twilight, I don't want to see her hurt when she's just trying to help. At least, not to this extent. With Pinkie Pie, it wasn't that severe, but with the Beehive and the skunk, it's like, oh, that's too much. But I wouldn't say that's the worst part of the episode. No, that honor goes to Spike. In most other episodes up to now, he's really supportive of Twilight, but here, he's just so critical of Twilight, who's only trying her best, that it's actually disheartening to see. And aside from pestering Twilight to use her magic to make things easier for herself, he doesn't really do anything in this episode. This is definitely his lowest point in the series so far. And yeah, I get it, he's a kid, and kids are generally brutally honest, but just because this could be in character for him doesn't make it pleasant to watch. Especially when otherwise, he contributes absolutely nothing of value to the cause. Heck, throughout the beginning of the episode, he just seemed like he wanted to go back to sleep. If you had to put him in this episode, why not have him help Pinkie Pie with melting the ice in the lakes? At least then he'd be more than a worthless boat anchor. My complaints aside though, this is a pretty okay episode. Barring the song, it really isn't spectacular, but Spike really does a lot to drag this episode down. Also, to my recollection, this is the first episode where the EI in the top left corner actually means something. And you can thank Fluttershy for giving us our fun fact for this episode. Episode 12, Call of the Cutie. Apple Bloom is desperate to get a cutie mark. We've seen over time for this show other ponies than Twilight Sparkle getting the focus for the episode. But this episode is truly unique for season 1, where Twilight has almost no role whatsoever. Our star this time is actually Applejack's little sister, Apple Bloom. And I just have to say it, I really wish more episodes did this, because Twilight does not have to be involved in every single plot. And it's really cool to see other ponies get the spotlight with Twilight having almost no real role here. As for the episode itself, it's good. Very good in fact. Apple Bloom is just such an endearing character. And in addition to being relatable, because let's be real here, we all dream at some point to grow up faster, but she's also just someone you really want to rally behind. You want to see her happy, and even though she doesn't get a cutie mark at the end of the episode, she does make 2 friends in Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo. Which, it's a good thing she's not going alone, because if it was just her with Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon, I don't think I'd be liking this episode very much. Yeah, Diamond Tiara, let's talk about her. She's a brat, and everybody hates her. End of story. Like, I ragged on Gilda for being a one-dimensional bully, but Diamond Tiara takes it up to 111. Because trust me, we're gonna be seeing her a lot more throughout the show. I guess let's talk about how Apple Bloom tries to get a cutie mark early. A lot of these scenes are really funny. From pestering citizens to buying apples, which they don't even really want, to that montage of experimentation with Rainbow Dash, there's just no shortage of really funny moments in this episode. But hey, if you ask me, I think she'd make for a really good magician. Have you even seen the way she flawlessly took a tablecloth from under a punch bowl and some glasses without causing anything to fall on the ground? If you ask me, Trixie could take some notes from her. All in all, this episode was great, and I hope that over time, Apple Bloom just learns to chill out and enjoy the journey of growing up. Which I say despite knowing that, well, she won't. And oh boy, will that be a topic for another episode. Because spoiler alert, Rainbow Dash's advice on how she was not going to get anywhere in a hurry does not stick. Episode 13, Fall Weather Friends. Applejack and Rainbow Dash compete to see who's the better athlete. So this episode stars the duo of Applejack and Rainbow Dash, some of the strongest and most competitive ponies we've ever seen in this show. And it leads to an absolutely thrilling rivalry. Yeah, I really love this pairing. Whereas in Look Before You Sleep, the conflict felt really forced and inorganic, the conflict here is a lot more natural, and dare I say it, a lot more fun to watch and listen to. And I think a lot of that is just because throughout the entire episode, it feels like Rainbow Dash and Applejack are actually friends. In Look Before You Sleep, it felt like Applejack and Rarity legitimately hated each other. In this episode, it's a lot more playful, there's a lot more laughs, it feels like it's a lot more laid back, even though these two are really competitive ponies that really want to win. And that brings me to their actual competitions. I love the Iron Pony events. It's energetic, it's fun, it's got this really good back and forth between the two mares fighting against each other. I'm a wee bit miffed though that Rainbow Dash was thinking it'd be okay to use her wings in some of the events in the later half. Like seriously, getting extra distance in the long jump and the tug of war game? For the latter, what's even the point of having the flag in the middle of the rope if you have to be dragged into the mud to win? But aside from that hiccup, it was great. And this leads us to our main event, the running of the leaves. And as it turns out, the season's fall. So let's recap. In the Ticketmaster, it's said to be summer. We skip fall and skip straight to winter in Winter Wrap-Up, which is to introduce spring, and 2 episodes later, we arrive in this episode, meaning that it's been at least 1 year since Twilight's arrived at Ponyville. I guess time really does fly when you're having fun, though you'd think the Grand Galloping Gala would have already happened by now. Anyway, this race, the running of the leaves, it does something that I think is really interesting. So, remember back to the Ticketmaster where I called out Rarity's lack of generosity? Well, this episode does something similar with Applejack's element of honesty and Rainbow Dash's element of loyalty, but I actually love how it's executed in this episode. Namely because Applejack is trying to hold Rainbow Dash to her word that she won't cheat, and then when she sees Rainbow Dash cheating, she decides that it's not worth playing fair anymore. And given what happened earlier with the Iron Pony competition, this is perfectly understandable for her. Likewise, Rainbow Dash is trying to stay true to her word to not use her wings in this race. But after seeing Applejack use Pinkie Pie's hot air balloon to actually hitch a ride to the front of the pack, which by all accounts should be completely illegal for a race like this, makes her break her loyalty because she sees an honest pony like Applejack cheating. This is a significantly better way of deconstructing their elements. And once again, unlike Look Before You Sleep, I also thought Twilight was a lot better used in this episode. She's seen here as the voice of reason, basically keeping both Applejack and Rainbow Dash in line to make sure they understood that it was not being interfered with that caused them to trip up. And since she is a part of the race and is pacing herself, it doesn't break the flow of the race because, well, the race is still going on. This whole event is just excellently executed, and the whole race is insanely thrilling from the beginning to the very end of it all. It is clearly a good episode. Though, does anyone else find it weird that despite the fact that there were like 42 ponies in this race, somehow just because of Applejack and Rainbow Dash's fighting, a bunch of trees didn't have their leaves fall down? Like, I'm no math expert, but I don't think 2 ponies should make that much of a difference. But hey, anything to see Rainbow Dash and Applejack have their playful rivalry again. Episode 14, Suited for Success. Rarity runs herself ragged crafting dresses for her friends. The first episode specifically spotlighting Rarity is an absolute delight. So of course I like it, right? Well, no I don't. I love it. This episode does a bang-up job representing Rarity's element of generosity, and it shows that she's very good at what she does. But more than that, this episode just makes Rarity incredibly likable. Seeing her pour so much time and effort into those first dresses she makes for her friends, just to hear they didn't really like them very much. But then like it's no problem even if it's a bit passive-aggressive. Ultimately, she's putting her friends first, and that's really cool of her. This episode also does a great job making you feel sorry for Rarity that she's putting herself through all this turmoil, leading all the way up to this big old fashion show where all of these dresses that she made for her friends that they wanted to see on full display utterly bombed, and it's just, it's so funny seeing everyone cringe at them. On the note of Rarity's friends, I also really like how they're portrayed in this episode. Even when they're all at first not satisfied with the dresses that were made, they're not overly demanding. They only really start getting pushy when Rarity already makes it apparent that she's gonna bend over backwards for their sakes. In reality, they're only giving Rarity what she wants, whether or not she really needs it. And it gives way to some very funny moments. I still love that quote that Fluttershy gives as far as her critiques towards how Rarity made the dress. It will always be funnier than Rainbow Dash's 20% cooler comment. Speaking of which, it's just really interesting to see what's on the main six's mind. Fluttershy thinks that she knows better what she wants and has shown to be very meticulous in how it's made. Talking about her dress, of course. Applejack focuses on practicality more than appeal. Twilight focuses way too much on accuracy over design. Pinkie Pie just wants to make it pop and just wants to see whatever she can be fit on there. And Rainbow Dash, well, just doesn't know what she wants until she sees it. And it's just really cool to see them all have these unique takes. And I haven't even gotten to the song yet. Art of the dress is heavenly. In addition to being beautiful, it just makes the art of making the dresses, well, no pun intended, go by much more fast and actually be entertaining to watch, as I imagine that without this song, it wouldn't be nearly as fun to actually see Rarity make these dresses. And the ending is just so touching. See the main six all want to make it up to Rarity after they blundered her big break. And we get one of my favorite morals all show so far. And the morals that both sides learn are both extremely applicable. For Rarity, you can't try to please everyone, and for the main five, aside from Rarity of course, you shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth when they've already put so much in for your sake. I have nothing negative to say about this episode. Wonderful execution, and it made me actually like Rarity. Episode 15, Feeling Pinkie Keen. Twilight tries to understand Pinkie Pie's pinky sense. Oh man, I've been dreading talking about this episode. So let me get out there the one thing about this episode that I actually liked, and that's the humor. I found it funny to see Twilight get on a literal soapbox to explain magic is actually real, but Pinkie sense isn't. And also to highlight where Spike is worrying if Fluttershy exploded. Twice. But that's all I really liked about this episode. Everything else, I absolutely hated. Where do I even start with this one? How about the fact that we the audience have come no closer to understanding Pinkie sense than Twilight was at the beginning of the episode. Like, I can kinda get why Twilight never really learns what Pinkie sense is or how it works, because quite frankly this episode makes her incredibly dislikable. She comes off as incredibly pretentious and snobby to the point where I'd be convinced that she's the antagonist. Say what you want about bridal gossip, but at least that episode at Pinkie Pie acknowledged that Twilight was not making much sense. And the sad thing is, at first, I actually agreed with Twilight here, because you can't believe in something that you don't understand. That's actually true. But when the moral that you're basically bullying Twilight into learning is that sometimes you have to choose to believe in something even if you don't understand it, that's where I have a problem with it. And take it from me, a Christian, you can't choose to believe in something. I believe in the presence of a God because of creation and the evidence surrounding it. And even if you didn't believe that a God existed, you at least can believe in stuff that is invisible, like the air we breathe, or the music we hear, or the voices you hear from other people, or the smells you can smell with your nose. Just because you can't see it does not mean that it does not exist. And moreover, it's honestly foolish to believe in every little thing anyone says. Generally speaking, you have to be persuaded to believe in something, and if you're not convinced, and I mean to the point where you can even explain it yourself if need be, it isn't faith. At best, your beliefs are blind, and when put to the test and you can't defend it, you will quite frankly fall apart under the smallest hit of scrutiny. And it doesn't help that Twilight, who's being portrayed as skeptical, is not only insufferable, but is the only victim this entire episode to everything that Pinkie Pie predicts. I have a lot of ill will and ire towards this episode, and if you cannot already tell, it is a nightmare episode! That being said, I really want to move on because this topic just makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even talked about how Fluttershy being in danger was less of a concern to Twilight than proving Pinkie Pie wrong. Or the ending where Pinkie Pie basically bludgeons the message to Twilight to take a leap of faith because she doesn't see any other way out. Even though Twilight did a lot to put herself in this situation by charging at a Hydra instead of running away. In summary, cramped and narrow is the road to a good episode, and this episode did not find it. Episode 16, Sonic Rainboom. Rainbow Dash wants to perform the Sonic Rainboom for a competition. Of all the episodes so far in this show, this one to me feels the most real. Rainbow Dash's terror over her stage fright feels real. Seeing Fluttershy jump for joy after seeing Rainbow Dash finally succeed in pulling up the Sonic Rainboom feels real. The tension and admiration you feel for Rainbow Dash when she swoops down to rescue Rarity and the Wonderbolts feels not only real, but incredibly exciting. And you just feel so happy for Rainbow Dash at the end of this episode, like she finally did it! And during a time where it really mattered to do it more than any other. Like it's one thing to do a Rainboom for show, but here where it's to save someone's life? It just adds this element of awe to Rainbow Dash's character and makes her look like a real-born hero. Though truth be told, this episode is all around just really good. I love the setup for this episode, and seeing Rainbow Dash try so hard to pull off a Sonic Rainbow, which according to Fluttershy, she's tried like 100 times and hasn't been able to. I love how subtle this episode is about her stage fright, and how she really is afraid she won't be able to pull this off. And just knowing the lengths that Twilight and her friends go to actually support Rainbow Dash at her performance, it just feels so sweet. I mean, yeah, Rarity did get carried away and started showing off her wings like there was no tomorrow, But A, she was called out by Twilight for doing it, and B, she almost died because she entered the competition. Traumatization aside, I'm pretty sure she's learned her lesson from this. There's only one itty bitty little thing though that I'm not necessarily crazy about, and that's with Fluttershy. Yeah, near the end of the episode, she's roaring like a lion cheering Rainbow Dash on when she pulls out the Sonic Rainboom. But prior? Well, I'm not bothered by her in the beginning of the episode because I can understand that she's just not a very loud pony. But her little pep talk, let's call it, in the middle of the episode where she's trying to calm Rainbow Dash down, you know, I think all she really had to mention was just the fact that Rainbow Dash, maybe she wasn't able to pull it off before the Sonic Rainboom, but that doesn't necessarily mean she would not be able to do it now. But mentioning all the spectators and how she's going to be silently judged for her performance, I'm going to be generous and say that's just Fluttershy basically projecting her own insecurities onto Rainbow Dash, but it really felt like she just served to make the problem worse. But again, to her credit, that rousing cheer she gave at the end really did feel like she was passionate over Rainbow Dash's success. Good job, Rainbow Dash. Good job. Episode 17, Stairmaster. Fluttershy babysits the Cutie Mark Crusader so Rarity can finish her work. I have a lot of problems with this episode. And unfortunately, just about all of them have to do with the Cutie Mark Crusaders themselves. My first and probably biggest problem with them all is that they act basically interchangeably amongst each other. Outside of Sweetie Belle maybe being a little overly zealous trying to help Rarity and then just making things worse, and maybe just a tiny bit later in the end where she's trying to break up Apple Bloom and Scootaloo's arguing, I genuinely can't tell them apart. They all just act like a bunch of obnoxious, rambunctious kids. And all this shouting at the beginning of the episode just makes them really annoying. They had some charming moments like when they were trying to be creature catchers or when they were at least trying to fix Fluttershy's table. So it's not like they're irredeemable brats, but I just did not like them. It feels like they just really overstayed their welcome, and that might be what the writer was going for here. Because Fluttershy also looks visibly annoyed at having to deal with them all. And my second is actually a continuation from a problem I had from the Call of the Cutie. Namely that they're trying to do too much in too little time, so obviously you know they're not going to get their cutie marks. It all just felt like it was serving to fill dead air. So yeah, the CMC in this episode, at least for me, utterly flopped. But what about what I liked about this episode? Well, there are two things. The first itself being Fluttershy. This episode does a lot to further her character. Not only in showing that yes, her patience does have limits, but the skill she gains in this episode, the Stare, it really does feel like it adds more to her animal whispering talent. Which if I have to say as well, it does it better than Dragonshy does. You see, not only with Dragonshy, but also just seeing Spike in general in this show, it's demonstrated that dragons and ponies aren't that much different from each other. So Fluttershy's whispering to animals doesn't really make very much sense for dragons anyway, but that episode got a pass because the only dragon we saw at this point in time is Spike. So a cockatrice, a naturally wild animal that we see in the Everfree Forest, it makes a lot more sense that Fluttershy's Stare would actually have an impact on it, in addition to just being a really cool scene for Fluttershy in general. Also, I'm of the opinion that the Stare that Fluttershy has doesn't really undermine her character at all. Now, I observed this all the way back in Friendship is Magic Part 2, but Fluttershy has a very motherly personality to her. But being motherly doesn't really mean you only can be gentle. I see this as Fluttershy's way of silently communicating that she is not playing around. So you better listen before I lose my temper. And Tartarus knows no wrath like a mother's rage. So yes, I really liked Fluttershy in this episode. The second thing I like though is the storytelling. This episode does do a pretty solid job at explaining what the cockatrice is without explicitly telling us what it can do. It follows one of the most important rules of storytelling, show, don't tell. And to me at least, it makes sense that Fluttershy would not immediately tell the CMC what a cockatrice can do, and instead describe what it is so that they know what to look out for. Remember, Fluttershy is a timid pony, so it's only natural that she would panic. And we get an idea for what the cockatrice can do when we see Twilight turn to stone, but seeing it actually happen before our eyes with one of Fluttershy's chickens is a whole new level of terrifying and very well told. So yeah, there are a few things that I liked. But does that mean I like this episode? It doesn't. But it's at least okay, right? Well, it's... yeah. To be brutally honest, I really did not like the CMC in this episode. So while I will rank this episode as okay, it ranks at the absolute bottom of that okay rating for me. But everything else is very solid, and I still love how Fluttershy was portrayed in this episode too. I just hope we can at least see eye to eye on this. Episode 18, The Showstoppers. The Cutie Mark Crusaders enter a talent show to discover their special talents. Before I start this review, I just have to issue an apology to Applebuck Season. I thought that was a boring episode. I didn't know what a boring episode was until I got to this one. Let me preface this by saying that I don't think being predictable is a bad thing. If anything, I encourage it, because you have to make sure your story actually makes sense. This episode, though, was extremely predictable, and yet somehow it was also one of the most nonsensical episodes of the show so far. Not even 2 minutes into the episode, we see the CMC's talents and what they're best at. And I'm not mad that they don't recognize their talents right away, because naturally speaking, it is easier to see someone else's talents than to see your own. What I do hate though is that they're not subtle about it at all. If they had stayed to complimenting each other until maybe after they hear about the talent show and they're assigning each other roles as far as what to do in the talent show, this wouldn't bother me nearly as much. But hearing this all be stuffed in our faces pretty much, and then they spend like 3 minutes trying all these other miscellaneous tasks trying to get their cutie marks after the fact, it just feels like such a big bowl of nothing. I cannot stress this enough. This has to be some of the most bored I've ever been watching this show. Not only do the CMC try stuff that's way less interesting than Apple Bloom did in Call of the Cutie, but by now you also know there's no chance that they're gonna get their cutie marks here. The ball got dropped extremely hard for the setup of this episode, but it doesn't quite stop there. No, we'll come back to this meteor later. Seeing the CMC prepare for the talent show I thought was actually pretty good. They're all helping each other, and it's a lot more subtle about how good they actually are at what they're really good at than what we saw before. However, this has the unfortunate side effect of amplifying a problem I had earlier in the episode. It makes the CMC look like idiots. Like I said earlier, I can completely understand that the CMC may not be able to see their own talents, but when you have it shoved in your face so forcefully that it's impossible to ignore, I have no idea how you can miss that. Like, if you're good at playing the flute, and an adult acknowledges that you're good at playing the flute, you're gonna know you can play the dang flute. What makes this moment different? I'm sorry if I'm getting heated over this, but this genuinely makes me angry to see that the CMC are being characterized this way. And yet, this wasn't beyond salvaging. Which brings me to the talent show. Now, ignoring the obvious problem that a talent show is not where you go to find your talents, it was nice to see the CMC were having fun trying to perform. But unfortunately, that's not enough to save this episode from being a nightmare episode. And a large bit of that is because of the ending. Now, I get it, this ending was supposed to be played for laughs. This is a very blatant attempt at misdirection and trying to make you think that they would learn one moral, but they don't. They had the perfect opportunity to realize that they were not playing to their strengths after bombing their performance at the talent show, and they instead should have used that experience to focus more on stuff they actually enjoy doing. Just give the hunt a rest. Or heck, what if they actually did get their cutie marks in this episode, and then they explored the possibility that maybe getting your cutie mark doesn't define that that's all you can do. Instead, we get a moment that feels like a genuine slap to the face. They learned nothing from this adventure. This episode went nowhere, and it honestly feels like this episode could have fit in 11 minutes, not 22. I hate this episode, and honestly, I wish it never existed. Episode 19, A Dog and Pony Show. While collecting gems for her dresses, Rarity gets kidnapped by Diamond Dogs. Ladies and gents, they did it. I don't know how, but they actually managed to freaking do it. The writers figured out how to make being annoying actually funny. And yeah, basically any scene involving Rarity is absolutely amazing. I actually find it really funny to see what Rarity's friends really think of her. And given past episodes, that is a lot more realistic than you'd think. Which honestly makes the reveal that Rarity has the social awareness to deal with these Diamond Dogs that are trying to use her as a slave a lot funnier. And the best part is that Rarity basically saves herself in this situation. Yeah, as it turns out, Rarity isn't just good for being a seamstress and nothing else. She's actually pretty capable. And keep in mind, she doesn't go She-Hulk or Wonder Woman on anybody. She just basically complains a lot like, well, Rarity does. And she gets the Diamond Dogs to beg Rarity to go away from them. Not only is this a good episode, but it does a fantastic job at actually subverting your expectations. That's mighty impressive. With that being said, let me potentially commit sacrilege and tell you all why I did not really think this episode was that great. For starters, it's the fact that Spike managed to keep that gem safe that Rarity gifted him, and it looks like the first gem he received from Rarity, and it's actually outright stated also that he's sacrificing this gem to save her. Which, yeah, it's really cool of Spike to do this, but I honestly thought he'd have eaten it by now. He seriously still has it? I wouldn't normally have a problem with this, but here's the thing. At first, he was salivating over wanting to eat these gems, and he just didn't because Rarity didn't let him. And to my knowledge, Spike isn't known for self-control either. They could have changed the shape, changed the color, changed the type of gemstone it even is, but they used the gem that Rarity gave him to rescue her. It's even revealed later in the episode that Twilight can replicate Rarity's gem finding spell. Why not just use that spell to find another gem and use that as bait? I honestly feel like I'm missing something because this looks like a plot hole to me. Forgive me for being skeptical, but I just don't buy it. Secondly, while I did find Rarity's whining to be pretty funny, I'm not crazy about it like others are. Though the mental image that she was crying so loudly, or at least fake crying to the Diamond Dogs, that her friends were able to hear her from across the tunnel, it really sells it to me that she was putting these Diamond Dogs through hell. So I'll at least give her credit for that. But really, that's the only problem I have with this episode. And yes, don't you worry, even with that plot hole existing, this would still be a good episode, but I'd be lying if I said it was in my top 5. Episode 20, Green Isn't Your Color. Rarity is jealous of Fluttershy's unwanted newfound fame. Never before have I found an episode that I wanted to love so intensely, but I couldn't because of just one critical blunder. This has to be the absolute closest to being a good episode that I found all season so far, and I can't find it good. Yeah, it's an okay episode. There is so much about Green Isn't Your Color that I absolutely love about it. Photo finish is freaking hilarious. The drama surrounding Rarity and Fluttershy, it's incredible. This had the potential to be a fantastic character study on Rarity's envy of Fluttershy's newfound fame, and Fluttershy just wishing she could tell the truth but can't because she'd feel guilty for breaking Rarity's hopes and dreams for her. I'd even go as far to say that this had the potential to be my favorite episode of Season 1. But unfortunately, Pinkie Pie is in this episode, and she absolutely ruins it. Unlike Stairmaster, where I hated the CMC, but I thought Fluttershy was at least a big part of it that made me really appreciate the episode a lot more. But at the same time, I can't really see Stairmaster without the CMC existing in it. Green Isn't Your Color had absolutely no business having Pinkie Pie in this episode, at least not to the extent that she was in it. Literally, all she accomplishes in this episode is making a problem that will be extremely easy for Twilight to solve, impossible for her to solve. And quite frankly, by forcing Twilight to keep her mouth shut, it gives me the vibe that Pinkie Pie would watch the world burn, even if she knows that she can save it. This just has to be her worst appearance in all of Season 1 so far, and before this, I already didn't like her very much. After all, Pinkie Pie didn't promise anything as far as trying to keep that a secret from either of the two parties. At the very least, she should have been able to quell this frustration, not cause it! Oh, but she had to be in this episode, otherwise Twilight would have just blabbed it and she probably would have never have learned anything. Let me ask you, what if instead of having Pinkie Pie hold Twilight to her word that was only detrimental anyway, we maybe got some perspectives from other ponies, like Applejack, who see the element of honesty and would likely blab the secret if it meant that both parties would benefit from it, or maybe Rainbow Dash the element of loyalty, who would value trust instead. They can have very different viewpoints, and though either of them would never really care for fashion, it would make Twilight's struggle a lot more internal than external. She wants to tell the truth for them, but can't because she worries that she'd lose their trust. She wants to keep her secret, but she knows that if she keeps doing it, then Rarity and Fluttershy will become even more distant from each other. Yeah, unlike Look Before You Sleep, I can still see how Twilight could be integrated in this episode naturally. And the sad part is, not a lot would have to change even for this to work. I want to love this episode, I really do. It does so much right, and it has so much going for it. But you know what they say, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. Episode 21, Over a Barrel. The Appaloosa settlers and native buffalo quarrel over the land. I find this episode to be rather interesting. It portrays a tale between settlers and natives and determining who's actually right. However, it actually portrays both sides to be relatively reasonable. The settler ponies want the land because, well, they need food to live off of and they use that orchard to actually grow their apples. But the native buffalo owned the land first, and so they thought they were entitled to something that they were able to stampede on without any issues before. And not being able to stampede that land would have to break tradition. I have to say, it took a lot of courage on the writer's part to write a story like this. It could have been very easy to have one side look morally superior to the other. But that mistake was avoided, and so this episode actually came up pretty solidly. For that reason alone, I can't give this a nightmare rating. But was the episode good? Well, I have to be honest, I found this episode to be pretty funny. Some moments fell more flat than others, like when Rainbow Dash was chasing down Limitless Strongheart just to hit a stop sign, or Braeburn being completely oblivious to Applejack trying to talk to him. But inversely, I like Chief Thunderhooves, and I like how he was explaining about like, oh, his father was doing the stampeding before him, and his father before him, and his father before him. It goes on long enough to be funny, but not too long to overstay its welcome. Also, seeing both the Chief and the Sheriff agree that Pinkie Pie's song sucked was one of the best things I've seen all episode. Especially after seeing Green Isn't Your Color. And speaking of Pinkie Pie, I actually found her funny this episode. Even though all she does is start a war between the ponies and the buffalo. I think this is because she was the first victim of the buffalo stampeding, which I appreciated. Also, her message of "you have to share, you have to care" was stolen by Twilight, which I just have to say, thank you, Twilight. She didn't deserve that moment. So yeah, the moral is solid, the story was good, the humor was really good, and the episode? It's good! Though I just have to wonder, who is this episode really centered around? I couldn't really tie it to any member of the main six, or Spike. I guess just between Applejack and Rainbow Dash, but they seem really secondary to this conflict than anyone else. Oh, and before you ask how pies can do so much damage to Buffalo, those pies were not homemade. They were made in a factory. A bomb factory. They're bombs. Except the one that hit Chief Thunderhooves. Okay, let's move on. Episode 22, A Bird in the Hoof. Fluttershy tries everything she can to cure Princess Alessia's pet for her. No cap, this has to be one of the funniest episodes of the whole season for me. No other episode from this season was able to get me to laugh so many times in so many moments. Especially in the beginning. Like, I don't know why I just find that Pinkie Pie's cartwheel to some ponies while she's trying to leave Sugar Cube Corner. I don't know why that made me laugh so much. Or Princess Alessia breaking the cakes with trying to drink from the teacup and then not really drinking anything from it, having them spill the tea on the table. It's definitely one of the most cartoony episodes of the show. You could argue that the main six have their personalities just a little bit exaggerated here, including Twilight, but I think it actually adds a lot more to the humor of this episode than anything else. But in its defense, this episode focuses mainly on Fluttershy, and she acts really no different than you'd expect. That being said, not every joke in this episode made me laugh. Philomena only got one time in this episode to get me to laugh, and that was at the very end with Rainbow Dash. Just because the payoff was finally able to hit us after seeing Rainbow Dash try to get these guards to emote, and they just don't. The moments of slapstick though of both Twilight and Fluttershy felt like a watered down version of that one scene where Rarity was torturing the Diamond Dogs in a Dog and Pony show. At least that episode got me to think it was funny, even if I didn't actively laugh at what was happening. And unfortunately, most of the episode really would just be these moments. Which wouldn't be a problem if it had more of a story to this episode, but there really isn't much. Honestly, much like the Showstoppers, this episode probably could have worked in just 11 minutes, not 22. I don't hate this episode like I do the Showstoppers, but it genuinely feels like it's lacking in substance. So unfortunately, I can't declare this episode as good, but I'm not going to declare it a nightmare episode either. It's okay. A little on the lower side, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad episode. It felt mostly tepid, but when it got me to roar with laughter, I roared. Episode 23, The Cutie Mark Chronicles. The Cutie Mark Crusaders ask the main six how they got their cutie marks. Simply an amazing episode. It's kinda crazy how the writer was able to fit 22 minutes worth of origin stories and not have any of it feel rushed, all the while tying them all to a single event. Nothing short of brilliant. And it does an absolutely phenomenal job at describing just why the main six got to where they are, back from their humble beginnings. It's even got some good jokes in there, like Rarity being led by her whore into a rock, and then after the rain boom happened, she then discovers a bunch of jewels in there, and that helps her discover her special talent. Or even seeing how Twilight managed to meet Spike for the first time. It turns out she actually managed to hatch his egg to pass an entrance exam. And it was awesome seeing Twilight enter the Avatar state. It's also just really cute, seeing a homesick Applejack realize she wanted to live on the farm with her Granny Smith and Big Macintosh. Fluttershy's absolutely adorable song with her animal friends. Pinkie Pie bringing so much joy to such a dreary old land than her farm. There's even some neat little animation nods, like seeing Fluttershy's body is more developed as a filly than anyone else in any of their flashbacks. Which, if you remember back to Griffin the Brush-Off, you actually hear that Pinkie Pie is a year younger than Fluttershy is, which to me implies that she's probably even the oldest of the main six. I also just have a really hard time deciding which of the stories was my favorite. Yeah folks, this whole episode is a highlight, and it's a good episode. It also gave some much needed characterization to the CMC, in addition to the really cute moments thinking that their sisters were the coolest ponies in town. Scootaloo especially stands out. This episode makes her a lot more tomboyish. And well, the beginning bit with the ziplining was pretty funny. If I had any complaints at all, they'd be nitpicks. But I really wish that the Mare in the Moon was at least foreshadowed. Don't get me wrong, I already appreciate a lot of the attention to detail in this episode, but that would have been the real icing on the cake for me. After all, we haven't seen Princess Luna at all in Season 1, and this would have at least been a pretty cool cameo for her. Time to think of it, don't you find it weird that we haven't seen Princess Luna at all since she was reformed in Friendship is Magic Part 2? If they were going to wait this long to do anything with her, they probably could have saved the episode where she was reformed to later in the season. Episode 24. Owl's Well That Ends Well. Spike gets one-upped by an owl that Twilight adopts as a nocturnal assistant. This is the very first Spike episode. By that I mean, this is the first episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic that revolves entirely around Spike. So how'd they do? Well, I'll give this episode this. For how bad it was, I somehow found myself laughing at it a lot more than most others probably would. And that's not to say this episode was funny. No. This was a nightmare episode. A big, fat nightmare episode. But my god, this episode was so bad, I actually found it funny. Outside of the beginning meteor shower, everything about this episode is absolutely terrible. So you know how we can assume that at least a whole year has passed since Twilight has come to Ponyville? Remember that Spike has been Twilight's friends for as long as she has been too. This will become imperative to a big problem I had later on. But for now, let's talk about the dialogue. Now, this is only a theory, but I feel like the writer really thinks that we cannot think for ourselves and be able to interpret how the characters feel from their body language or mannerisms alone. Everything, and I mean everything, that Spike is feeling cannot be conveyed with anything else but having him narrate them to us. It is very in your face, and it actively makes me feel like I'm being treated like an idiot. Which on its own is bad enough, but even with how this episode makes it so ridiculously transparent how Spike is feeling, Twilight for the life of her cannot possibly be able to understand. Even though Fluttershy and even Rainbow Dash can recognize that Spike is upset. And keep in mind, Twilight is literally right there listening to these two and then dismisses them both. Fluttershy recognizes that Spike may feel threatened, and Rainbow Dash acknowledges that Spike is probably jealous. And to be fair, why wouldn't he be? Rarity for some reason. Okay, remember this. Spike knew Rarity for at least a whole year, and she gave him a diamond-encrusted bow tie. She did the same thing for Owlowiscious after knowing him for like 2 minutes. At least it felt like 2 minutes. Either way, she just met the owl, hasn't even seen him before, and she already has a gem-crusted bow tie for him? That is so petty! Also, Twilight says that Owlowiscious is only being used for nocturnal reasons? That's a straight-up lie. The day Spike wakes up with Owlowiscious around, Twilight says that Owlowiscious already did all of his chores. Keep in mind, a nocturnal animal. He had every reason to believe that he was being replaced, and yet the episode paints him as in the wrong. Even when Spike is wide awake and trying to accept orders from Twilight at any chance he gets, Owlowiscious is also awake, and quite frankly, he's doing Spike's chores better than Spike had ever hoped to. Which brings me to another problem with this episode, and yet it's not even the biggest blunder. Owlowiscious is a Mary Sue. Just think about it. Everybody fawns over Owlowiscious except for Spike, and Spike is portrayed negatively because of this. He's better at doing Spike's chores, he manages to write Spike out for actually burning one of Twilight's books by accident, and in the climax where there's a big dragon that Spike's eating his gems of, he ends up being able to fend it off. Keep in mind, this dragon is way more dangerous than the dragon we saw in Dragonshy. Sharper nails, spikier tail, and much more lethal fire breath. And yet Owlowiscious is flying circles around this dragon, while Rainbow Dash got punted like a hacky sack after bucking it just once. But you have to wonder, how did Spike get into this mess? Well, after Twilight said that Spike is not the same dragon that she knew and loved, he ran away from home. How did that happen? Because Spike was trying to frame Owlowiscious for, I guess, acting on his predatory instincts. And this leaves a catch-up trail with somehow Twilight and Owlowiscious managed to use to track Spike down. I say somehow because after Spike chooses to run away from home, and he asks if things could get any worse, it starts to rain. Which you'd think would get rid of the catch-up trail because, well, it's raining, it would wash it off. And later in this episode, we even see that the catch-up trail is gone and his feet are perfectly clean. Just to then later on see, after Owlowiscious saves Spike and Twilight from the dragon, that once again he has the catch-up trail on his feet. Yep, this episode is a plot hole. By the way, are we really supposed to believe that we needed Owlicious to navigate through a dark forest, even though it's very likely that Twilight can use illumination magic herself? I mean, yeah, she hasn't used it before to my knowledge, but if freaking snails can do it, I, and by extension you, have no reason to believe that she couldn't do it either. I legitimately cannot think of a single good thing to say about this episode. Nothing makes sense. Twilight is beyond idiotic in this episode. Maybe instead of just assuming that Spike knows that he can't be replaced, you go to him, sit him down, and make sure he understands that. It's really telling that this episode spends its entire runtime trying to narrate feelings that should be incredibly obvious to us, the audience, but not to the literal baby dragon that needs to hear it. Let us move on, shall we? Episode 25, Party of One. Pinkie Pie becomes suspicious of her friends when they avoid her party. Of all the episodes so far, this is the one in the most split on whether determining if it's a good episode or an okay episode. Let me explain why and hopefully convince you why I feel this way. The first thing I have to say though is that this episode gives us a very interesting look into Pinkie Pie's psyche. We learn in the Cutie Mark Chronicles that what ultimately gives Pinkie Pie's life meaning is just bringing joy to other ponies. And so being convinced that her friends don't really like her anymore and don't like her parties and how it actually has her hair deflate, just like her hair before getting to see the Sonic Rainbow that Rainbow Dash pulled off, it really says a lot about her personality without having to say anything outright. Her mental breakdown after hearing Spike confess that Pinkie Pie's friends don't want to be her friends anymore was also really, let's just say enlightening. But lo and behold, it was all because of a surprise birthday party, which I find funny for two reasons. One, the party pony Pinkie Pie, try saying that 5 times fast, got so caught up in the excitement of another birthday party for her pet Gummy that she forgot her own birthday, which I just find is really funny. And two, this might be because of the episode's pacing, because it feels like the very next day, but it really feels like she scheduled Gummy's birthday party for literally the day after the party that they just had. Like when her friends were making excuses for why they couldn't show up, I was waiting for at least one of the main 6 to mention how the party that they already had just yesterday was like way too early for them to have another one. But to be fair to this episode, it was never actually mentioned that there was a birthday party the day before. And to be fair to Pinkie Pie, this is her pet's first birthday party, so it's also fair enough that she would forget her own birthday because, well, she's more focused on other ponies than herself. So at least I can believe that she would forget her own birthday. As for Twilight's friends and how they avoid Pinkie Pie throughout this episode though, I will say they had their moments, though I found it awfully contrived how they were using the exact same phrasing about this afternoon, and no like real variation on that phrase. The highlight of this act though just has to be Applejack. Her being a bad liar makes this actually really funny. Especially since Pinkie Pie is smart enough to be able to tell that she's not telling the truth. As for the moral, I found it okay. It's not enough to make this an okay episode, so there you go, it's a good episode, but I find it too idealistic. To say you should always assume the best of your friends does not really make much sense to me. I mean, yeah, you're really your friends and you'll have the best interests at heart, but that's not really practical. And unfortunately, this seems to be a running theme where Pinkie Pie's episodes don't have the best morals to teach the kids. It's not bad to be skeptical if you have reason to be skeptical. A better moral would be coming to accept that the world does not revolve around you. Though I have to say, it's honestly a miracle that this episode came out to be good, considering that Pinkie Pie is my most hated member of the main 6 so far. Episode 26, The Best Night Ever. At the Grand Galloping Gala, the main 6 find their special night to not be all it's cracked up to be. Yep, alluded to all the way back in episode number 3, we finally get to see the Grand Galloping Gala in all its glory. And despite being an utter nightmare for literally everyone involved, it is definitely a good episode. There is a lot to love. The song at the gala is absolutely beautiful, and just might be the funniest setup for what we're about to experience for our main 6. Things start off well, but gradually get worse and worse up until the climax where it all goes downhill. Fluttershy has quick to spot animals, but they don't want anything to do with her. Applejack starts selling her merchandise and can't make any more money for the rest of the night. Rarity finds her prince, Blue Blood, and he ends up being an absolute pompous buffoon. Rainbow Dash tries to hang out with the Wonderbolts, but can't seem to get their attention. Pinkie Pie wants to party, but no one wants to party with her. And Twilight just can't seem to get an audience with Princess Celestia. Seeing all their days go wrong just was incredibly funny, especially with Fluttershy and Rarity. Fluttershy because she just goes complete freaking Pinkie Pie and Party of One psycho at everyone, and goes full yandere at the end of the episode. And seeing how scared the animals were of her, well, shoot, when she got to the point where she tried trapping the animals, yeah, you went a little cuckoo. But Rarities was the highlight of this episode, even though all 6 of the main 6 were really funny. Her date, Prince Blueblood, is a complete and utter lout. No manners, no courtesy, and absolutely no respect. Amongst the things he does is he makes Rarity pay for food for them to eat, has her open the door for the two, has her use her dress to cover a puddle, and seeing Rarity put up with him up to the point where she's used as a pony shield to block a cake? Also keeping in mind just how averse Rarity is to getting dirty, as we've seen a Look Before You Sleep, a Dog and Pony Show, a Bird in the Hoof, and in this episode, you just know you've awoken a sleeping giant. So yeah, this episode definitely has its highlights. I also just really love the ending. Sometimes even when your date really isn't at its best, sometimes just having some close friends with you can make it all the worthwhile. This episode just also has a really big era finality to it. And man, what a high note to end Season 1 on. And that ends our review of every episode from My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 1. Overall, how did it do? Well, we have 12 good episodes, 7 okay episodes, and 6 nightmare episodes. Not the best, but far from terrible. However, because only about a little over half of the episodes were all considered good by my standards, and about a quarter of them were nightmare episodes, I can only call this an okay season. There were some monstrous highs, but also some very deep lows. But to this show's credit, so far when it failed spectacularly. And when an episode is good, it is very good. With that being said, how can we get this okay season to be a good season? Just to give some advice for what to look out for when we get to Season 2 of this show. For starters, they have to stop putting Twilight in every episode. Yeah, this is a really big problem, but Twilight appears literally every time, even when she doesn't really have to be there. Even given this, a lot of episodes featuring Twilight don't have her be too intrusive. Whether by giving her a very small role, or just making her a lot more natural to how she's actually implemented. But there were also episodes that really did not need to have her in there, and there were also episodes that were actively made worse because she was included. Here's hoping that Season 2 actually allows it so that Twilight doesn't have to be in literally every episode. Another thing is just to focus more on the rest of the main 6 and other characters. Let's see some more episodes dedicated to ponies like Rarity and Rainbow Dash or Fluttershy, or maybe even the CMC. And just see what these writers can do if they just have to focus on these characters without having to shoehorn one main character in every episode. Heck, maybe we'll be able to see Princess Luna in more than one episode, and the episode where she was reformed at that. Another thing to understand is just that sometimes less is more. So try to be more subtle about how some of the things are handled in the episode. Words are not the only way to get a point across. Trust your audience to be able to understand through what animation you show. If done well, it will feel very natural, and trust me, I will be able to appreciate it. This show has a lot of potential moving forward. Let's not squander it. And with that, it's time for our worst 5 and best 5 episodes of Season 1. Remember, this is all my opinion, so if you disagree with that, well, you have your comment section for a reason. So, let's review. Number 5, Feeling Pinky Keen. It bullies the skeptic pony like Twilight into learning a broken moral, and that is something I cannot forgive. But it only barely cracks the worst 5 because at least it was funny. Number 4, Ghostbusters. A dead-on-arrival plot with reprehensible main characters that make a villain actually look like a saint, and yet she's the only one that actually loses in the episode. And she loses big time. All the while introducing characters that absolutely nobody likes. Number 3, Look Before You Sleep. It's one thing to write a bad episode, but it's another thing entirely when I can't even tell what you were trying to do with an episode. And it portrays grown adults arguing like they're little children, which is not funny, especially when they actually have little sisters. And you know, their own businesses. Number 2, The Showstoppers. If you were actually excited to see the CMC's journey, this episode is an insult. If not, it's miserably boring and offers absolutely nothing of value at the end. And number 1, Owl's Well That Ends Well. Easily the worst episode of the show so far. So bad that I cannot find a single thing that it does right whatsoever. Twilight and her friends all look petty, it introduces a Mary Sue character in Owlowishes, absolutely zero hints of subtlety, and riddled with plot holes. Truly a masterclass in how to write a bad episode of My Little Pony. But at least take solace in this. As bad as these episodes all were, the worst of them all was still better than anything we've seen in Generation 3. Not much of a compliment, but take what you can get. As for the other Nightmare episode, The Ticketmaster, it wasn't bad enough to reach the top 5. At the very least, Twilight and Spike were likable, so it had that going for it. And as for Friendship is Magic Part 2, well, honestly that deserves its own video, at least if you're interested in seeing it. But the top 5 best, let's talk about them. Number 5, Dragonshy. The first, truly remarkable episode for all the right reasons in this show. A great showcase for most of the main 6, and it makes Fluttershy look actually cool. Number 4, Sonic Rainboom. This episode made me proud to be a fan of the show. A grand tale for Rainbow Dash, and it made her into a very respectable hero. Number 3, Fall Weather Friends. Extremely clever writing, and an absolutely phenomenal showcase of Applejack and Rainbow Dash at their best. Number 2, The Cutie Mark Chronicles. Simply divine, and it gives us so much to digest in so little time, which is also important because this episode is just a very important episode in general because of the lore it sets up. And number 1, Suited for Success. This episode is simply perfect. I can't think of a single thing wrong with it. It took a character that I really did not care about at all before this episode in Rarity and catapulted her into the limelight with a mix of beautiful music, top-notch storytelling, an incredibly relatable dilemma, and a spectacular ending. Even with its girly concept, that does not mean that this cannot be a fantastic episode. Just like Rarity when it comes to her knitting, it's all about skill. So, how did you like my very first venture outside of the realm of Pokemon and into the world of Equestria? Leave a comment below and I will try my best to reply to it. Special thanks to Ricardo for still being a channel member for all this time. Thank you ever so much, you are so awesome. I really don't deserve your generosity. Until next time, this is Aurantula signing out. Thank you and goodbye.